Our wonderful stories. We're going to read part of the last of the Elijah Chronicles in 1 Kings. And you may remember that before we read this passage from 1 Kings 19, Elijah has just won his greatest victory. What does that greatest victory entail? Does anybody remember? Does anybody remember what happens when Elijah has a showdown at high noon with hundreds of prophets of Baal? Y'all remember?
Yes.
How that story goes?
The altar was consumed in the water and everything.
Yeah. So he gives the prophets of Baal a chance, and he lets them do their oogity boogity over the altar, and they try to get a flame kindled, and they can't get much going. And he says, I tell you what, I've given you all a chance. Go ahead and pour some water on that wood so it will be fireproof. They pour some water on the wood, and he calls down fire from heaven, and the whole thing is consumed, and everybody goes, ooh. It's this spectacular fireworks display for God. And what happens? After Elijah is done showing how powerful God is, this is where the story takes a turn for the grizzly. Elijah finishes his day by killing all of those prophets of Baal. It's all in a day's work for the prophet, I suppose. But the landscape is scarred with the fire of God, and it is littered with the remains of those who were faithful not to God, but to Baal. So word of that gets back to whom? Do you remember? To the woman in charge, and her name? Jezebel. It's just a great villain's name. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. And Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, listen, so may the gods do to me and more also if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. She signs a contract on Elijah's life. Then he was afraid. And he got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. And there he left his servant. He goes it alone. And he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat under a solitary broom tree. And he asked that he might die. He wasn't going to take his own life, but he wouldn't mind at that moment if God takes his. And he comes and sits down under a solitary broom tree, and it says, "It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." And then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel, same word here is the messenger, the same word that is used for the messenger from Jezebel, except this time it's a messenger from God. The messenger from God comes and touches him and says, "Get up and eat." So he looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. The cake that's referred to here, the only other time it's mentioned, is with the story that Deborah just told of the widow of Zarephath. He is reminded there in the wilderness of the time God had provided for him and for that widow. And a jar of water, and he ate and drank and lay down again. Thanks, God. I'm going back to sleep. The angel of the Lord comes a second time, touches him and says, "Get up and eat, for otherwise the journey may be too long for you." And he got up and ate and drank, and then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. Y'all know Horeb? What happened at Horeb? Horeb is the place where Moses had his brush with God. Saw God's hindquarters. right? And at that place he came to the cave. In Hebrew there it says not a cave, but the cave. Probably the cleft where Moses had hidden, so as not to see God face to face. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone have left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." The same thing that happened when Moses was in that cleft. Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But, you guessed it, the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire, the sound of sheer silence. We can't even imagine with the air conditioning rumbling in the background. Sheer silence. Silence so silent it was loud. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, covering his face because he knows in that silence there is God. And then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answered, this is great, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are after me, seeking my life to take it away." Has anything changed for Elijah? Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram." And this is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. This story begins with a messenger of death. Jezebel's messenger, coming to tell Elijah that his jig is up. His time on earth is over. He better say his prayers tonight, because by the time tomorrow rolls around, Jezebel is going to have his head. And Elijah believes the messenger. And he begins the process of divestment. You know what happens when you know your days are numbered? You start saying to your servants, "You stay here, I'm going out there." No need for any collateral damage. And Elijah goes out a day's journey past Beersheba, and he is in the wilderness. This is Elijah who should be taking his victory lap. He should have his prophet's mantle around his shoulders, like the victorious Olympic runners put the flag of their country around their shoulders and take their victory lap. That's what Elijah should be doing. But he, instead of exulting in the victory, instead of listening to the voices of all of Israel, which are talking about his victory on the Mount Carmel over of the prophets of Baal, instead of concentrating on those voices and capitalizing on this moment of victory, he doesn't feel like he's won at all. He feels defeated in victory. He doesn't feel joyful or thankful or restful. He feels empty, joyless, restless, thankless. Woe is me. I'm the only one in all of Israel keeping the faith. his moment of victory is snatched from him because Elijah believes the messenger of death. How many of us let that happen? Like the time you preach the sermon, you just know it's just good, and the majority of the people coming out of the sanctuary are shaking your hand saying, "Thank you, that was just the word I needed to hear. Oh, thank you, that was wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you." And then there's one person who comes and says, "You know, that was garbage. I don't come here to listen to stuff like that." And that person's voice is the only voice you're thinking about over the lunch table when your spouse asks you when you get home, "So, how was church?" Well, there was that person who went out grumbling about the message. Well, that's what's happened to Elijah. He's allowing Jezebel's threat to be the only voice he hears. And he's tired. And he's kind of like Rosa Parks when she was asked to move from that seat so long ago in the bus. And she just said, "You know, I'm too tired for that. Whatever happens to me, whatever consequence I have to face, whatever the punishment, I'm just going to stay right here. Just sit down right here and stay where I am." That's the point to which Elijah has come. I'm tired, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm going to lie under that broom tree and go to sleep. He is tired and he is dejected. How many of us, when we grow weary, also grow despondent? We think, "I've labored so long, and for what?" Y'all know the story of Pyrrhus? Y'all ever heard of Pyrrhus? The historical figure from the 3rd century BC. He was a king, and he was facing the Roman Empire, and Pyrrhus won a victory against Rome. In fact, he won 2 victories in a row, but those victories were so costly. They cost him so many men, so many soldiers, so many resources, that when he won, he was quoted as saying, "I cannot afford another victory like this. Another such victory, and I am undone." Have you ever felt like the victories you've won are Pyrrhic victories? That's where that phrase comes from, a Pyrrhic victory. A victory like Pyrrhus won against the Romans. He won the victory, sure, but at the end of the day, the Romans had more soldiers they could call up than Pyrrhus did not. And we feel as if we might gain some ground, but at what cost? We find ourselves depleted. We find ourselves done. At the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, when there's a lot of month at the end of the money, when there's a lot of effort on our part and nobody else seems to be pulling in the same direction. Elijah is tired, he is dejected, and we're told by the passage that Elijah is afraid. Why would Elijah be afraid? He has just conquered 450 prophets of Baal. He has just set fire to this big stack of sticks that was drenched with water. What does Elijah have to be afraid of? I wondered as I read this passage whether what we have here is Elijah finally in his ministry having something to lose. When you put a few victories together, people's expectations begin to rise. And you wonder in your mind, will my next victory be that convincing? Will I be able to be as flashy or spectacular as I was on Mount Carmel? Will